We're very proud to welcome Professor Herbert Lin from the Hoover Institution at Stanford as our first speaker to kick off the day. Professor Lin is an expert in cybersecurity and cyber policy. He's an expert in how the internet is used not necessarily for good things, but for bad things in the context of attacks in the cyber world, and also the policies that can be deployed to manage and protect platforms and infrastructure. He's a well-known scholar in the area. He's based at Stanford University, and he's a fantastic speaker. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Herbert Lin to the podium to teach us about his work.
Thank you. Okay, so how many of you in this room are technologists? Okay, so that's a large fraction of the room here. I got to tell you, I'm nervous at this talk, okay? Because I'm going to say stuff in here that's almost certainly going to piss a lot of you off, okay? Almost all of you, I mean, I would wager that every one of you has a strong opinion on the Apple FBI controversy. San Bernardino and so on and so forth. And if I had to guess, I'd say that your minds are made up on that for, at the 99% level. Okay? I'm going to say some things that may, I hope, will at least get you to think about your position. On the other hand, if there's any law enforcement people in here, I hope they're going to hear some things too that make them rethink their position too. Okay? So if there were law enforcement people, I'd also be trying to piss them off. With that, I want to just sort of review the debate about exceptional access to encrypted communications and data, otherwise known as backdoors, good or bad, right? I mean, that's the, and technologists always say bad. And you'll see that point of view represented. Here are the two sides of the argument. This is what the Department of Justice says. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein gave a speech at the Naval Academy on October 12th on encryption, talking about about warrant-proof encryption. That is, encrypted communications and files that law enforcement can't get into under any circumstances. Okay? And you can see all those words there. Okay? Warrant-proof encryption defeats the constitutional balance by elevating privacy above public safety. That's their view. Okay? He draws a contrast between that and what he calls, quote, responsible encryption, okay? Which is basically backdoored, okay? What all of you would call backdoored. It's such encryption, responsible encryption can involve effective secure encryption that allows access only with judicial authorization. Such encryption already exists. For example, key recovery features that when you lose your password, you have some mechanisms for getting it back, okay? That's what he says. That's their position. Here are some requirements that they put onto this, okay? Law enforcement needs exceptional access that are surreptitious, real-time, instantly available, usable on any scale from small to large as legally authorized, for any kind of bit-represented data, cost-free without trade-offs to their mission, and available only to authorized parties. Anything less, they say, compromises public safety. I don't expect you to agree with all of those statements. Most law enforcement people would agree with those statements, I think. I think it's a fair representation of what they would like. The other side of it is from the best articulation of this is a paper by a dozen influential security and cryptography people called Keys Under Doormats. This is a report that came out of MIT. You just do a Google search on that and it will come up. It's the first thing. And it's an extensive treatment of the risks of key recovery, of backdoors, of exceptional access. Okay. Proposals are designed for exceptional access by law enforcement are unworkable in practice, raise ethical questions, undo progress on security at a time when internet vulnerabilities are causing extreme harm. We examine whether it's technically and operationally feasible. Providing, here's their second bullet is their issue. Okay. Providing exceptional access would force the user from best practices now being deployed, would impose increase system complexity, create concentrated targets that would attract bad actors, and move the internet from its current open and entrepreneurial model to becoming a highly regulated industry. Okay. Here are some of their perspectives. I think that, I'm trying to represent you in this, or most of you in this. You tell me if I have it wrong, okay? I think that there's a premise in this, that the security afforded by products and services has to be the best that's possible. You got to do your best. If you want to do security. Do the best you possibly can. Okay? Anything less violates your sense of professional ethics, and you have an obligation to do that, and if you don't do that, you're not doing the right thing by your customers. Adding exceptional access violates security practices? Yeah. And creates weaknesses? Yeah. Okay? And that restrictions on technical and other, and government access to personal information are good and serve the public interest. Okay? That's more of a civil liberties and privacy concern, but I would bet that a number of you in the audience feel that way too. Okay? Anything less than this compromises privacy rights and stifles innovation by allowing the government to interfere, intrude into technology design and development. Okay? I mean, I think there may be some quibbles with that. I think that's a fair representation. Okay? So here's the issue. The tech privacy community will say it is impossible to design a system allowing for exceptional access that is as secure as it can be. Law enforcement. It is technologically possible to design a system that allows for exceptional access that provides adequate levels of security. That's the argument. That's the clash. And I don't know if you've noticed, but they're not talking about the same thing. You have heard, maybe you even believe, that there is no middle ground. One side's right and one side's wrong. And in this case, tech people say, it's law enforcement. They can't do it. It's impossible. Sorry, there is a middle ground. But it's not a technology middle ground. It's a policy middle ground. All policy solutions imply less security. All of them. And what are the costs and benefits of less security? How much less? What's the significance of that decrement in security? That's where the policy debate is going to be fought. In the space between maximal security, and adequate security. Maximal security is a technical issue. Adequate security is a policy issue. And it would be really nice if the technology community and the privacy community and the law enforcement community were talking about the same thing. There are a zillion different proposals for striking a policy balance. Here are some of them. Okay? I'm not defending any of them. I've written on a lot of these, but not as an advocate, but as, here is something that will offer you less security and will meet some of the law enforcement's goals and some of the privacy community's goals, okay? But not all of them. Everybody's going to have to give. For example, one thing that's often talked about in the debate is lawful hacking. That is, take advantage of existing vulnerabilities. You hack my iPhone with a warrant, and you take advantage of existing vulnerabilities to it. Another version of that is to introduce vulnerabilities into your cell phone, into this cell phone, a specific warrant, so that I download an update to it, and it goes into this phone, nobody else's phone, and gives the FBI access to it. There are all sorts of downsides to that. You can see some of them. You could charge a fee for law enforcement for exceptional access, and you make it big. I don't mean a fee to be paid to the user, goes back to the Treasury or something. I don't care. It goes to the ACLU. I don't care where it goes. Okay? But the point is that law enforcement has to have some constraint on its appetite for using the back door. Money is a way of doing it. But every agency is constrained on money. And if you make the number large enough, you can prevent frivolous uses of it. Does it mean that will you be able to use it on routinely, every day, on every case, on thousands and thousands? No. You only want to use it on the things that are really important to you. That's the whole point of a restriction on it. You can impose civil liability on vendors. I know vendors all tech people hate this idea. They don't want to be subject to any liability at all. But right now, all of the incentives in their design architecture in their design are for providing more security. That's where they say the business requirements are. Okay, that's what the customers want. There's nothing that says give law enforcement access. Well, let's create something on the other side of that. Another way of helping to balance the scales. The idea here is that if you're subject to civil liability, if somehow the fact that you don't have a backdoor in it prevented law enforcement from getting access and then helping to solve a crime. Okay? You can emphasize protection against bulk surveillance. There could be a physical switch in here that would enable exceptional access, and then if you throw the physical switch, you can't do any exceptional access at all, but if it's in the police possession, you throw the switch and then you can do exceptional access. Okay? You can do biometrics versus passwords because biometrics can be compelled and passwords can't be. Okay? All kinds of options. I don't want to defend any of these solutions in detail. Okay? I can talk to you about them. Some of them, have weaknesses. Some of them have strengths. Some of them, but they all have the feature that they do not provide maximum security. None of them do. So I acknowledge that. I come to you and say all solutions, and that means you can't argue. You shouldn't argue with me and say no, it doesn't provide maximum security. Well, tell me how much less, and tell me what the significance of it is. That's where the argument will be. Same thing with law enforcement. Law enforcement will complain about every one of these because they don't get everything that they want either. How do you fight about this stuff in a productive way? Well, I'd like to actually fight about it in a way that has some clarity to some of the issues that every side in this has obscured in a way that I find really objectionable, frankly. Okay? And I'd like to get some questions answered in this. And all of these parties have something to do with it. The vendors do, the law enforcement community does, the privacy advocates, and society at large does. And I want to go through some of those questions with you. Some questions for law enforcement to answer. Why is it that law enforcement has never said, and we're asking you, the American public, to accept a lower level of security in return for what we want? They haven't said that. Tech community said that, privacy said that. Law enforcement has never, ever, 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 ever said that. Politically, of course, you can see why. But until they acknowledge that publicly, they can't get into this debate that less security means that they get certain benefits from it. So law enforcement, the society benefits in certain ways from lower security. It enables them to prosecute certain crimes and so on, whatever. That's a debate. That's a debate we could have. But until they're willing to say it gives you less security, you can't have the debate with them. So that's why you get statements from law enforcement that say things like, we have to maximize both privacy and security. What kind of a statement is that? Right? Logically, what kind of statement is that? Okay. Why don't they offer a specific technical design as proof of concept? course, the reason is they don't want to be beaten up in public over this. They want other people to get beaten up over it. But it would be nice if they think that they could do it. Fine, let's have a system to work on, and there will be some problems with it, and then we'll say, all right, it's less secure. How much less secure? We can have that debate. Why do they want exceptional access in the first place? For what kinds of crimes do they want it? How often do they expect to use it? No answers to any of those things. The public debate says, when you hear about the reasons they want, oh, this is for terrorism, this is for child pornography, this is for drug dealing. Yeah, all those things are really bad. Are they willing to limit the access to those crimes? Or is it also for deadbeat dads who don't pay their income tax? Or, child support? Certainly a bad thing, but, but are we willing to treat them as the same as terrorists? As we know, there are methods for doing exceptional access right now, right? Key recovery features. You lose your password to Gmail, there's a way of getting it back. What have been the criminal consequences of that? There have been some. Why isn't law enforcement willing to talk about those? Doesn't say anything about those. Okay. And people often talk about the following. People say, well, if you put restrictions on products with on products without exceptional access, there's no backdoors. Oh, the criminals are just going to go abroad and get them from abroad, okay, where they don't have those backdoors in them. Well, yeah, that's true, but that takes a lot of work. And what's the value of imperfect restrictions, making it difficult to get non-backdoored products? What would be the impact there? It's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I wish somebody in law enforcement would tell me. And then people say, no, only the bad guys are going to get this. You'll only catch the stupid bad guys. Right? Because the stupid bad guys will buy the stuff that has backdoors in it, and the smart bad guys won't, and you'll only catch the stupid ones. Well, I want to hear a story from law enforcement about why it's important to catch the stupid bad guys. Hint, I know it is. Okay? One example. The first World Trade Center bombing, 1993, rented truck. The guy who rented the truck to bomb it went back to get his $400 security deposit. True story. Sometimes it helps. And under what circumstances is content information irreplaceable? You hear a lot of people saying, oh, we're in a golden age of surveillance now because there's all kinds of data. There's metadata with your phone and all this other, you can get lots and lots more data. Well, but it's not content data. When is it irreplaceable and when is it not? Sometimes it is, it has to be irreplaceable. Sometimes it isn't. Somewhere between 0 and 100%. Where is that? Under what circumstances? I want to know the answer to that question. Nobody tells me the answer to that one either. For tech vendors, people like you, how do users prioritize security over other aspects of functionality, like convenience and usability? Why do you provide a password recovery feature at all? If you hate backdoors so much, why do you do this at all? Because a lot of people aren't going to use your product if they can't get into it, if they lose their password. People lose their passwords. How many people what proportion of users would opt out of a password recovery feature? I don't know the answer to that. You know the answer to that. You should tell us. That's an interesting question, relevant to the debate. If the answer is 1%, it has different consequences if the answer is 99%. I want to know the answer to that. Apple said it's impossible to build a one-time use operating system to be used in a given instance in San Bernardino. Nonsense. Why did they say that? Well, they say because once you build it, the knowledge can be used to recreate it. Well, yeah, but not the operating system. Okay, I don't know about you, but I've certainly had programs which once upon a time I had the knowledge to build, but once I lost the program, I sort of had a hard time rebuilding the program. Okay, if you're not like me in that, I want to know your secret. Okay. So, in fact, and they actually came back and admitted that that was wrong. Turns out the answer is that it's about a man-year, one person year to do what you need to do to invade a system. And you could throw that away. You could keep it under lock and key. You can have one copy if you do it in a sealed room and all that sort of stuff. And I want to know how government intrusion, quote, government intrusion or regulation would stifle innovation. Yes, I know that you don't want to have, that vendors don't want to have constraints on what they do. I get that. I understand why. But we regulate all kinds of other technology in the name of public safety. We demand seatbelts in cars, at least in the United States. We have airbags, and so on and so forth. There are a variety of safety features that we mandate. Why is that a bad idea in principle for information technology? And nobody in the industry has given me an answer to that question either. And what would be the difference in service, in market performance of products with exceptional access and without it? Exceptional access being called key recovery in a different context. This is an interesting question. Vendors should know the answer to that question. And I want to know what the vendors say about that. And for the privacy community, what's the actual harm to having a backdoor? I use products with backdoors, aka key recovery systems, all the time. I don't feel particularly harmed by it. Maybe I should, but I don't. So not everybody is harmed. The privacy community would have you believe everybody is harmed by having a backdoor available. No. Just not true. Some people could be harmed by improper access, but not everybody. On the other hand, there are many people who would worry that they would be about being harmed, even though they weren't. I mean, there are lots of people like that. Nobody would actually invade their communications, but they would in their files, but they would think that somebody might. That counts as harm. It's less tangible harm, but that counts as harm too. Okay? How do you take into account those concerns? How should you take into account those concerns? I don't know how to answer that. Okay. How often are improper exceptional accesses to information expected to occur? Okay. The answer can't be zero. Sometimes a bad guy is going to compromise a mechanism and get in. Okay. But you can't say that it has to be zero or else it's unacceptable. So the answer is, what number other than zero is acceptable? Privacy community isn't willing to answer that question either. 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in a million, 1 in 10 billion. I don't know the answer to that. But I want the privacy community to answer that. What number other than zero is tolerable in service of other goals? And a big question here, to me, is how do political trends change judgments about the desirability of exceptional access? And think about, I don't know, we might have an administration in power that believed in things like, retaliation against political opponents. What a far-fetched possibility. That wouldn't happen in America. Okay? But you could at least imagine the possibility that under different political circumstances, people might have different views of whether or not exceptional access, aka government access, is desirable or not. And for society in general, I don't know how to answer this question at all. Okay? There are two types of threat. Threats to confidentiality and integrity of information, and threats to physical safety of people and property. If you have exceptional access, you diminish the ability to protect against type 1 threats, the first type, that is, to threats to confidentiality and integrity of information. And you increase the ability to protect against type 2 threats, that is, against the physical safety of people and property. How do we prioritize those goals? Which is more important for us to prioritize? What's the right balance between protecting against those two? And how does it change with the latest headlines? You know the answer to that, right? It changes if there's a big, huge terrorist incident that kills lots of people and harms lots of property. You're going to see more people saying, let's prioritize type 2. If you see a big scandal about abuses of government authority, you're going to see more protection, more emphasis to protection against type 1 threats. Okay? And here's the real question. Should you design the infrastructure so that it's easy or hard to change with changing judgments and political perceptions about circumstance? Which is the right answer? I mean, do you want an infrastructure that is easy to change or is hard to change? I don't know how to answer that. But we as a society haven't made that clear. Anyway, so that's it. And I hope I've made some of you mad and uncomfortable. And I'm happy to entertain some argument in whatever time I have left. I don't know, how much time do I have left? Someone? You also boo me off the stage. Fine, question or two or comment or two, and I can't. I see a hand waving over there. I'm happy to acknowledge that as a point that's worth further exploration. So yeah, let's talk about that. But that I can't answer that question right now. Let's talk about that offline, and I'd be interested in talking about that offline. I think it's certainly a valid and reasonable point that you raised. There was something else down here, over here.
How do you deal with the issue of retention of data? I think the last data hack that we had in the UK showed that the information held by law enforcement in the US is not necessarily the most secure.
So I think the question is, how do you deal with retention of data? And the law enforcement view of the world is that I want to retain data forever, okay? And the privacy world and the business view of the world is get rid of it as soon as it's no longer needed, right? Those are the two extremes on that, and roughly the same kind of calculus applies here, okay? There's a sense in which exceptional access is a tool. I mean, what you could do is you could delete the data, i.e., encrypt it, and just give it, and just have a key that was available only to law enforcement under judicial authorization, and and so on. And you could go through all of that, the same kind of argument. I don't think it changes the nature of the debate at all. What you've just described is an interesting dimension of it, which if I write about this, I'll put that into it. Thank you. But it's in essence the same kind of issue. Over here.
Reducing type 1 security, make please an example how reducing type 1 security can increase type 2 security or safety.
Yes. Okay, so the question is, if I want to if I reduce the security available for confidentiality, I want to get, and how does that increase the safety against terrorists? It's the usual argument. If I can break into their communications, I can have a better chance of foiling them. Okay, so that I think there's no question that that's a true statement. Question is whether or not it's worth the cost. Okay, and so that's an example of it. We had over here about the
phone issue.
right.
So the government asked McAfee to hack the. So the government had asked McAfee about hacking the phone. I just want to know, what is your what can you say about the fact that we all know that McAfee is known for security, but what can you say about the fact that the government actually asked McAfee for a price to hack the phone of the terrorist down there?
I don't think that there's, McAfee's a private player just like anybody else, and if they have the skills to do it, they're free to offer their contract. They're free to offer their services to anybody who is, who bids for them legally. The FBI is a legal bidder, and if the FBI needs to get into it, I don't see that there's a problem with that. Why do you see a problem with that?
Well, I don't see a problem with that. I just feel like, because I know Apple was refusing to give them anything, so. That's why I was.
That was a business decision, and they said so. We don't want to do it, and we're not going to help you. That was the end of it. Other thoughts or arguments? Yeah, over here, on the right.
Hi, my name is Mark Peterson. I'm with Orange Silicon Valley. It seems that a lot of these issues extend beyond the matter of exceptional access into how we share data from companies to other entities for the public good. So it might be that during an Ebola outbreak in Africa, it's useful to get telecom data to track the movements of populations. All those same trade-offs that you have to make between public good and individual risk still exist there. Regulatory bodies are starting to step into that place, but oftentimes it's up to the individual company to make those decisions. And so my question for you is, should it be, and if not, how do we bring other actors in to influence the company's ability to make those decisions about what data to release and for what purposes?
So I think what you're saying is how does a company know the right thing to do under these circumstances? And the answer is that, from my standpoint, is that every company needs to have somebody on it that essentially serves the function of an ethics advisor or a legal advisor that has more than narrow compliance issues in mind. But that presumes a level of social awareness and responsibility that I haven't seen most companies have. And frankly, for most companies, it's a luxury to have that. This person adds to the bottom, adds a cost to the bottom line, and you have to justify that. In a world where social responsibility was widely regarded as a good thing for companies to pursue, in addition to their profit-making responsibilities, it would be different. But we're not there. You had another question next to you, I think.
There we go. So the question, I guess, goes back to your initial point of urging us to argue more carefully about these things, and I guess I, in part, come back to the question of taxonomy. Even the phrase exceptional access is a bit of a loaded statement, isn't it? Is it exceptional for law enforcement to have access to information where if the information were stored?
I agree that the term exceptional access is not a particularly good term. It's a term that was. I have fought this particular battle as about the right term for 25 years at this point. Backdoor is a loaded term, is an even worse term, and so on. And everybody's trying to claim the high ground on that. That's what, backdoor is what the Department of Justice calls responsible encryption. So there's no consensus on it. I've concluded that exceptional access is is the least bad of all terms. But, you know, if you can come up with a, you know, call it George. I mean, that would be, you know, that would be much better in some sense, but that would easily get distorted into, you know, do you mean George Bush or what? I mean, it'd get into a mess. Other thoughts or arguments? Or
Scott Mace, I'm a journalist with the Wall Street Journal covering the question about the Hikvision surveillance cameras being made in China this week. How complicated does it get when we have not just a discussion between our government and our citizens, but also maybe a foreign government whose industries are making the technology, the devices, and so maybe they have their own notion of a backdoor, and now we have a negotiation of sorts between the US government and the Chinese government. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so there's an, you know, so it's difficult for me to believe that the Chinese government would allow products out that it didn't have what it regarded as a sufficient degree of control over. Okay, and if they want to sell them on the export market, then the right American response is to not buy them. Are we going to get into an argument about that? Probably not, because I think that most people don't particularly care about this issue. It's an argument mostly among specialists, but I could be wrong about that. Should the U.S. government get involved in this kind of discussion? Perhaps. I can't see the current administration getting into an argument about privacy rights with China. Maybe it can, but I don't see that. Maybe we can talk about that offline. Other thoughts or arguments? No. Okay. I'm happy to argue with anybody offline. So, you know, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lin. That was a great way to set the stage for the rest of the day, where we really did get a sense of the balance between our national security and the need for privacy. Extremely well articulated.